Saturday Morning Marketing Podcast is brought to you by Esther of IPA Group, bringing premier online promotion to your business.
And Melanie of Stomp Social Media Training, who empowers business owners to manage social media and marketing for themselves.
Hey guys, and we're so glad you've actually come back to us again. Phew! So today I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to Alexis Bushnell of Social Media for Humans. We did have a chat about that rather extensively. And she's currently based in St. Athens, Wales. Apparently 9 months is not long.
What is time? What is time?
So she moved from France 9 months ago. And she's like, I haven't been here long. Oh, actually, yeah, it's been 9 months. Yeah, it's been a while.
I've literally grown a whole new human in that time.
Yeah, you could have done. So we brought you on today, not to talk about growing humans, but to talk about social media policies. And this is something we've actually had real trouble finding somebody who would talk to us about this. So when we came across you, Alexis, we grabbed you with both hands. So tell us, what made you, first of all, go into the sphere of social media policies?
Well, I mean, social media, weirdly, I'm not a very sociable person. So I've been one of those, because I'm not very sociable in person, I feel like I get my social kick online. Right. And so as social media became more and more prevalent, I just made sense. I just became that like social media person who was on it for personal, and then I was a blogger as well. Right. So I went into social media that way and did training through sort of blogging events and stuff like that, and then just kind of naturally went that way. Okay. And here we are.
So what kind of businesses would you work with, Alexis?
Mainly, I now work with neurodivergent business owners, especially small business owners who are in that situation where it's like a lot of the generic advice is very much just like, well, just post more, create more content, do more of this, be on more platforms. And they're just like, yeah, but like, no. So I very much work with people to go, okay, well, like, where are your people? Maybe just be there, but just do that content that you enjoy doing, and let's figure out how to make that work for you.
It wouldn't be that vastly different from, people who aren't neurodivergent, surely.
There is definitely people who are shy or just easily overwhelmed, just super busy. But I think because I'm neurodivergent myself, I've kind of grown a network of other people who are neurodivergent. And therefore there is that understanding of like, I think people feel safe to be like, well, I can't do this because my brain just doesn't do that way. Whereas there is often that fear if you're working with somebody who isn't neurodivergent or doesn't really understand what it means, that if you say that, it's like, well, just try harder or just do it. Like, I don't understand why. So yes, I will happily work with neurotypical people as well.
Okay, so and yeah, at the end of the day, the only thing that's different is the thought process. Everything else is exactly the same.
Yeah.
So social media policies. Now, we did talk very briefly before we kicked off, and one of the things we mentioned was maybe it's not absolutely necessary for a sole trader, for somebody who's on their own, to have a social media policy, unless it helps a disordered personality, perhaps. But when do you feel people would benefit from having a social media policy, Alexis?
I actually think it is really helpful, even if it's just you. Okay. Because I think, especially with social media, there is a real tendency to see that something is trending and be like, just go along with stuff. And, everybody's talking about this. Everybody's using this type of emoji. Everybody's using this GIF at the moment. Everybody's posting this meme. And to just go with it. And there are so many times that people then go, I that doesn't really represent me. That's not, I didn't want to share that. Now that I'm thinking about it, now that it's out there, and I'm realizing that there is some time between sort of the being caught up in the momentum and actually thinking about whether that aligns with my business and how I want to talk about things or people or whatever. And so I think it is really helpful to have a policy or some kind of document, even if it's super simple when it's just you, that's like, here are the things that I am happy to talk about on social media. Cool. Here is the way that I want to talk about things on social media. These are things that are absolutely off limits and I will not talk about because I don't feel comfortable. So that when there is stuff trending or all of your network are like, let's collaborate on this thing, and it's actually not something that you want to be sharing, or it doesn't align with the way you want to talk about that thing, you have a document. You can go, okay, no, this is not actually where I'm going with this. This is not right for me. So that you are less likely to find that you've done the thing, you've posted the thing, and then you have the regret.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there is very much the regret, isn't there? So it could kind of be like a checklist, couldn't it, for sole traders? Yeah. And I guess that's where like a brand persona and the colors, the language, that can all be sorted out before you get started.
Yes.
Well, should be sorted out before you get started.
Hopefully, yes. But yeah, it doesn't have to be a really like long, complicated document that's like multiple pages and checklists and forms and what have you. It can literally be like bullet points, like we'll talk about these things, won't talk about these things. This is the tone of voice. This is what I want people to feel when I post my things. Stuff like that just keeps you on track. Because the other thing with especially creating content yourself for your own business, it's so easy to just, if you're having a bad day, you're like, oh, just got to get this rant out. Maybe you don't really want that rant to be associated with your business. Maybe that's not the vibe that you are trying to build on your social media. But because you've not got something that's like, okay, yeah, ranting is fine, we get it, but not over here. You know,
well, never, that's one thing actually, never ever complain as your business, you know, on a personal thing like the electricity bill or, you know, bad service on your car or that sort of stuff, because I have seen it.
Yeah, but it's easily done. You know, we are human, we get frustrated, things happen in our day and we think, whatever, I just gonna get off my chest. This is relatable content, but it might not be the relatable content that you actually want associated with your business and your brand. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. Of course, once you start working with a team, you're outsourcing stuff, it needs to be detailed enough that you can give it to somebody else and they know what you mean. Whereas if it's just you probably know what you mean. You know, you've probably used your own language, you've shortened stuff, it's key things. Maybe you've missed out words, there's no full sentences, but you know what you mean. If you are then outsourcing, it definitely needs to be fleshed out a little bit. And I would say when you first start outsourcing, it can be really helpful to initially actually have a conversation with whoever you are outsourcing to make sure it makes sense, because that is also going to give you the feedback on how to change it, because we see things in our own way. And when we just deliver a document to somebody and expect them to see it with our eyes and our history and our brain, generally doesn't go especially well. So it can be helpful initially to have that discussion with the person you're outsourcing to and adjust your document accordingly, so that when you then are outsourcing again or you bring somebody else onto the team, you know, it's not just, oh, this makes sense to me. It's actually like, this is understandable by other people too.
You touched on some very valid points there, actually, because when I was thinking social media policies, I was actually only thinking of it in-house. But absolutely outsourcing becomes an issue as well. I suppose it's almost easier when you're doing it in-house because they very quickly pick up the ethos and, you know, the personality of the person who previously posted. But when you're outsourcing, you don't have that sort of relationship. normally.
Yeah. And I think if you're in-house as well, there is likely to be, you pick up things from people you're working around. If you're being mentored or trained by somebody as well, you're new starting, you're getting a lot more input from
you get a
other
full
people
induction
who
for a start, don't you?
Yeah. So it is very, very different. And so I think, but I do still think you need a useful, clear policy if you are in-house, because there is still, everybody is going to interpret things in different ways. And so it does need to be written in a way that leaves little to the imagination.
Okay, so you've got this idea that you need a social media policy because you've got maybe 3 or more staff, or you've got a couple of staff, you're the person, the owner may be doing it, and your staff have shown absolutely zero interest in taking over, so now it's time to outsource. So you start writing down a draft. We've outlined a few headers here, a few bullet points, but how in depth does your social media policy need to go, Alexis? Is there a template that you offer, or is there any suggestions that you can provide that will help people really get started down this road? Because it sounds quite complex.
I think it's as complex as you want it to be, and it will depend on each business. Because if you are offering multiple different things, you have multiple different target markets, you're trying to cover different locations and areas, it's going to be a lot more detailed because you've got a lot more things to think about, versus if you're a local business with one specific target market and one specific sort of signature thing that you offer along with a few other things that are related, you have much less to consider. Because what it comes down to really is understanding and making sure that whatever is in that policy ensures that people creating the content, people engaging on behalf of the business, are actually doing it in a way that is in line with whatever the business stands for, is what it comes down to. So that you are not getting somebody going out and engaging in Facebook groups or Twitter chats on behalf of the business and getting into arguments about politics that you do not want to be associated with, or sharing their thoughts on a competitor's ice cream that you really don't want to be causing more arguments about. So that people know exactly what's expected, and that you are constantly adding to whatever brand values you already have, rather than sort of just hit and miss whatever, just get out there, put some content out, do some engagement, get it done.
So I guess one of the ways to do this is to perhaps initially get posts or tweets approved prior to, unleashing them.
Yes, I think it can help if you are working with, if you're outsourcing especially, and obviously if you're bringing someone in to work closely with them, and also have them have a look at previous content that's gone out, because that can really help to give a more sort of holistic idea of what you've been doing, what the tone of voice is, what the feel of the content is as a consumer, which can then help them to create content which is it along those lines too. So if you already have content that's gone out, absolutely give the new person a look at all of that historical content and explain, if you can, like, this is why I used this image in these colors on this one, but I used this image in these colors on this one. This is why I chose to use these words in the caption, and I would never use these words. This is why we use these set GIFs, or we only use these emojis. These are sort of the emojis that
GIFs.
are with the brand.
You've got to even be careful with GIFs, don't you?
Yes. And I think the other thing is to remember that you might forget things, and there might be a social media sort of PR disaster. How you respond to that is what makes the difference. It's okay to have that mistake, but ensure that you learn from it and adjust your policy at the time, rather than think, okay, we're just going to sort of crisis manage now, and then it becomes this sort of thing that never actually changes the policy. It's just like, oh yeah, we should probably change that at some point. Like, do it straight away. When you're learning, do it.
I guess a lot of people only tend to think of social media policies when it becomes a disciplinary issue. So the whole point of the social media policy is to avoid that from happening in the first place, and to stop crisis management being something you need to discuss. So is there any examples that you can give us, Alexis, where somebody has either got it right or somebody who's got it wrong, in your opinion, when it comes down to social media policy in a workplace?
I could have done with like preparation time for this one.
See, when I think of good PR, because that's ultimately what we're looking at here, Garda Checkpoint over here in the Republic is amazing, because it's very fact based, but they also have a good laugh. And Dublin Airport as well absolutely crack you up with some of the comments they come out with. And I'm sure we've all heard the Wendy's personalities and that sort of stuff. But even they will have social media policies in place where they will only be allowed to go so far. But social media policy goes beyond just customer service, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And personally, I have complicated feelings about having rules for like the way employees use social media, because I think to a degree, yes, they are representing your brand, but they are also individuals. And I do think we need to have that distinction. And we are not always representing our employer. We are not always on in that way, and I do think that employees and business owners need the space to just be human as well. And I don't think that extends to being overtly racist or homophobic or whatever. But I do think if somebody has a bad experience with a brand and they tweet about it from their personal account, I don't think that should reflect on their employer. And I think we do need to kind of relearn that differentiation and allow people the
that's
space.
Wokeness, isn't it, Alexis? It is. People lose jobs for comments they've made about something else completely unrelated to their job. So maybe social media policies should reflect that we will, Google search your past for the last 10 years before we employ you.
Yeah. And I think it's very frustrating, because what I think the problem is with brands is not that they don't have the right social media policy for their employees or whatever, or that they're not effectively researching their employees. I think it's that they're not prepared to stand by their employees and say, look, they're a human, they were having a bad day, it happens.
It does depend on the crime, in fairness.
Of course. But I do think
everybody's stupid under the age of 20, frankly.
It's true.
Everyone is.
And I think, and I also think we need to be able to say, like, yeah, they said some stuff 10 years ago, but now they are actively supporting a charity that, counteracts whatever it was that they were saying back then. They donate regularly to this place. They do a lot of work. They support maybe like queer individuals in our institution, in our corporation. Like, people do change. I have said before, I used to be awfully anti-feminist. Like, you would not believe. It was not a good time. If you looked at my tweets from back then, you would think very awful things about me, and rightly so. They do not at all reflect anything about me now, because I've grown as an individual.
Yeah, and all of us have. I mean, the only difference between you and I, Alexis, is when I was your age, there was no such thing as Twitter. Oh my God, I'm old. But, social media policies don't have to make or break the brand, though, do they? I see them as flexible tombs of information. Do you agree?
Yeah, they are very much more guidelines. And I think a lot of it is that not seeing them, like you say, as like rules, but as like, you need to understand the why they're there, because that is what can inform the nuanced decision making of like, well, do we go with this GIF or do we go with that GIF? Because if you've just got like, don't use GIFs with this cartoon character in them, well, why? What if it's somebody else's drawing of that cartoon character? Does that count?
Yeah,
you can't cover all of the possible types of issue that are going to come up and decisions that are made. There are too many things. So the idea is to give whoever is creating the content, whoever is doing the engagement for the brand, whoever is being the sort of voice of the brand, an understanding of why those policies are there, what they actually mean, what do they mean for the language that you want to be associated with the brand, and the feel that you want to be associated with the brand, and the vibe you want to give off. How do you want other people to feel when they engage with the brand? Because that is what actually makes the difference in decision making on which language you use and which colors you use and what image you use and what have you.
So let's say somebody's reacted badly to a statement that's been put up by the brand. Now, I know most policies, I'm pretty much sweeping the board here. I think most people say, if you're posting up as the brand, you need to put your initials up or something that delineates who you are when you're responding. If somebody makes a mistake, is there part of the social media policies, maybe they've reacted badly or misunderstood something, it happens. Is there usually a disciplinary process put in place, or, does it depend on what it is or how public it was, or is it, how is that sort of thing structured?
I imagine it depends very much on the business. Okay. I would like to think that more and more businesses are opting for sort of a retraining than any kind of sort of serious discipline, depending on obviously what's happened.
So it really depends on the type of business. So do you have any backstories there that you can tell us that where it's worked for some business, or and different size of businesses, or maybe it's here in the UK or Ireland or the US, anything like that?
I don't have any stories, but I would just like to say generally that I would prefer to have more of a retraining process than to immediately go in with anything disciplinary. Right. Because I think a lot of the time these mistakes are people just being human, which happens, and also maybe a misunderstanding of the policy. Maybe the policy wasn't clear, or it wasn't gone through thoroughly enough with somebody. The underlying message of it was not made clear. And so I do think there is much more use in actually taking that person aside and saying like, right, okay, when we say this in the policy, what we mean is blah, 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 rather than going, you did a bad thing, you're awful, never do this again.
So make it black and white. Yeah,
exactly. Because it's never black and white. And this is something that is, again, comes back to the idea that they are not just like firm rules, that it is a guideline to give you some context for what is happening on social media for that brand. And so I do think that having some compassion and allowing for like retraining of people and just going over things again, and also just building in regular check-ins of like, okay, we're still going this way with the brand. Does anybody have any questions about this? Rather than going in with like the, oh no, you have ruined our brand persona forever, we will never forgive you.
My God, I want to work for you. Wow, you're so reasonable. Okay, so you're now going down this path of social media policies. How do people start working this out? I mean, do they normally come to you after they've made some huge bomb drop on their social media, or do some people actually come to you beforehand?
People don't usually come to me specifically for social media policy. They
Yeah.
usually come to me for just like generally help. Social media is hard, help. But it is always a part of that, because I think it helps so much to have that guideline in place, even if it is only you, because then you have something to lean back on. And when you are, even if you're stuck for creating content and you're like, oh, I have no idea what I want to say today, you can have a look at that policy and be like, okay, this is, get more into that sort of the vibe and your own brand again, and have some ideas come up around it. So it is always a part of what I do with people, because I do think it has to be. But it is rarely something that people consider. Also, interestingly, very rarely something that I find brands and businesses come to me with when they want me to do their social media.
Right.
Generally tends to be something that they like come to me and they're like, so will you do my social media? And then I'm like, okay, yeah, we discuss it, we organize it. And then I'm like, do you have like a social media policy, brand guidelines? And they're like, I'm sorry, what now? So yeah, there is a lot of creating those for people as well.
Whoa, okay. And we haven't even touched on customer charters, which is part and parcel of a social media policy, but it is a slightly different thing. And that'll be for another podcast. But no, quite seriously, you know, it's a huge quagmire out there of, there's so many things that people feel they need to do in order to protect their brand and their staff as well. And so it's so important we've got people like yourself out there that can help us clear through the weeds and the disruptions and the mistakes, and that's why it's so important to speak to somebody who does this sort of thing, because they've seen these mistakes happen and how people have come out the other side, and you know how they've overcome it. So how do we learn more about you, Alexis? Where's the best place to get hold of you?
You can either hop over to socialmediaforhumans.club, or you can find me mostly on Instagram at Alexis Bushnell, but I am elsewhere on the internet as well.
She's everywhere.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, thank you so much for your chat today, Alexis. This has been really interesting, and I've got to be honest with you. You probably see me sort of bite my lip a couple of times because you've been saying all these things. I think, oh God, I've only got so much time to do this podcast. But this has been really, really interesting, and I hope it's got people starting to think outside of what they do every single day. It's not always about how you're perceived; it's how you make other people feel. Mm-hmm. And you can't blame your staff for doing something wrong if you haven't been checking in on them and making sure they thoroughly understood in the first place.
Exactly.
So, well, that's all the time we have for now, guys. Thank you so much for listening. As usual, if you've got any questions, you're welcome to fire them directly to Alexis Bushnell at socialmediaforhumans.club, or you can contact us and we'll pass them over to Alexis. And if you've got any other questions or queries, or you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, just like this one, which was only requested a couple of months ago, it's taken us a while to pin someone down, then do let us know. That's all we have for now. Bye. You can say goodbye, you know.
Okay, goodbye.